Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chest. We have a return guest joining us with a unique story to present, a unique format, you could say. So I'll get to the format in a second, or what we're going to be discussing, but our guest is an author, a psychology professor at the Queens College of the City University of New York. He specializes in late life depression and cognitive impairment. He's also a practicing clinical psychologist, busy guy, but he's an avid chess player. I interviewed him in episode 309 in 2022. Great interview for those of you interested in sort of the intersection of psychology and OTP chess. His books are great as well. Collaborations with Grandmaster Boris Gulko, a series called Lessons with a Grandmaster, and the 2023 book, Analyzing the Chess Mind, which is fantastic. And as we discussed in our prior interview, our guest also has accomplished extremely unusual improvement as he started tournament chess at age 33 and reached a rating of 2047 USCF. I can tell you that hardly ever happens, but it also might be part of what's driving the reason for our second interview. But before we get into all that, let's welcome back to the program Dr. Joel Sneed. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so to delve a little deeper into the backstory, so there's this big tournament here in the United States called the U.S. Amateur Team East. Those of you in the U.S. probably are familiar with them. Over 1,000 chess players in one overcrowded hotel. But what makes this tournament different is there's a real lack of money involved in the tournament. It's pretty inexpensive. And of course, that you're playing with a team, often with friends. And a lot of people who are even semi-retired from tournament chess often go to these tournaments. So there's a reunion aspect and a camaraderie aspect that is stronger than many other tournaments. And Joel and I both have been struggling to get back in the ring. And when we were discussing that recently, we decided we and a couple other friends are going to play in the U.S. Amateur Team East. So we've been trying to use this as an impetus to play more. And then Joel is still, as it turns out, we started out with study plans and we both struggled a bit with that. But then Joel had an acute incident and almost was ready to quit. I'll let you pick it up from there. But if you don't mind, could you start with the story of what made you text me and say, I'm not going to play in this tournament?
Well, it's not the first time. Our teammate, Uri Feld, a friend of mine for many years, I text probably bi-weekly with the same text. I think, and if it didn't, I haven't done this, but if you look at if you go to USCF tournament history, you'll see pretty clearly, like, I don't play often. And I honestly think, I'm probably better than my rating, or at least I used to be. And I think it hasn't quite caught up with where I am because I don't play almost ever. And it's getting worse and worse. And I think I do want to talk about sort of the syndrome to get into that with you. But, I don't know this. I should have looked at this before we talked. But I think that, last year I played 6 games and they were in January. They were 3 games. I lost my first 3 games. They were horrible. There was something wrong with my brain. I don't know what was happening. And then I won the last 3 games. And I was like, I don't want to play anymore. Like, it was a horrible experience. Literally, like, in one game, I remember that I lost, where I was, much better, 1.5 pawns, right? Like, kind of thing. Out of the opening, I was clearly better. And I said, oh, my opponent only has this one silly trick, so don't do this. And I literally did that after spending like 10 minutes talking to myself about how not to do that. Like, so something was wrong with my mind a little bit, and maybe that's not being in shape or something. But, I played through it and I salvaged the last 3 games. But that was the last time I played. It was a year ago. So, and if you go back to the year before that, I don't think it was much better. And the year before that, and I think you probably see maybe there were years in the past where I might have played 18, 20 games in a year, and it's down to 6, and it's getting worse and worse. I think that has to do with what you started off with, right? So started chess very late, tournament chess at 33. Maybe I started playing at 30 or 31, like studying. I remember reading that great beginner book by Yasser Seirawan, Winning Chess Strategies or something like that. It's a
Hmm.
great little book. It has to do, with time and structure and all that kind of stuff. It was really the four elements of chess or something it was a fantastic book, and it was very helpful. And I remember, like I went from like getting crushed by my father-in-law to like beating him easily just from reading that one book. And that was the beginning of it. And I started pretty much soon after that playing in tournaments. And so that was like, but it's unusual to start at 30 something years old and go from nothing to 20, 40, or whatever I was.
Yeah.
And so that there's a lot of pressure that I put on myself. And that pressure, on the one hand, is good because it makes me work hard and study hard, and I'm very, very determined to, to do the stuff that people find to, uninteresting. I love studying end games, and I love studying, stuff like that people didn't really enjoy. So I just put, kind of grind away for a long time, and it helped. But when you combine that with a goal that is increasingly difficult to meet for a number of reasons, which we can talk about, then it can become problematic. And so what I have discovered, so the syndrome that I have that that I think a lot of people have, because I've heard you talk about it here on the pod. I've heard them talk about it, maybe in the dojo podcast, in various podcasts, this sort of like culture of playing a lot of blitz online and quitting and going on tilt and throwing up your hands and quitting and stop playing, and then you start again, and then there are all these people writing online about they have this goal. I'm going to get to 1800. Here's my training plan of 8,000
Yeah.
puzzles a day, and all that kind of stuff, and they come up with these completely crazy plans and stuff to become a grandmaster. I'm faulty of all that too, and what happens to me is that I'll say, okay, I'm gonna play again, as we talked about, right? I'm gonna play in a tournament. So that means, what does that mean? Well, I got to have an opening repertoire to play, right? And then what I'll do is I'll create one of my 8 billion opening repertoire files, in ChessBase, and then I go online to play it as if that is sort of like a magical transition to playing, perfectly good, having not played. And then I play badly and it upsets me. I get upset, and then I play more and I play harder and I play more and I play compulsively and I go on tilt. And then after a little while, maybe a day or something like that. Luckily now it's a day. It used to be more than days, multiple days. And now I just go, well, here I go again, and throw up my hands. I quit, and I give it a couple of days, and then it starts again. And I start, well, maybe I'll play this, and I was like, play the Nimzo in
Right.
the
Switch the opening.
right,
That'll
right,
solve your
yeah,
problems. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll play, the Nimzo in the Bogo Indian or something, and E4, and then I'm like, I create a repertoire, and I spend a week or even 2 weeks, no blit, no playing, no nothing, just creating the repertoire. And then I'm like, okay, I created that, and the level of detail is ridiculous. The paying attention to lines that you don't see in practice, ridiculous, and it's just not practical. A practical way to go about chess improvement. And then I'm like, okay, I've got my repertoire. Now I'm going to go play. Lo and behold, I play terribly. You know what I mean? I go on tilt. I revert back to something that I know better than the new repertoire, but I'm not playing, so that doesn't work out because I play. I'm playing badly. I'm not studying. I'm not doing the stuff that makes you a better chess player. Go on tilt, quit, and the cycle repeats over and over and over and over. And so, part of saying agreeing to play was me saying, like, I'm sick of and tired of this cycle that I'm in and that I've been in for a long time. And I managed to drag myself to a tournament that, once a year, as you can see from my history, but not very often. It's in large part to me constantly going through this cycle. How could I go play if I'm in the middle of this cycle? It's a disaster. so I don't, and so I was like, well, I'm going to agree to go play with you. And I thought, okay, well, I can't disappoint Ben, like that's not cool. And lo and behold, I was like, I went through the same process, and I was like, you know what? I just, at that point, I was like, well, okay, I might as well just hang it up altogether. But then because the gods of chess will not allow me to get out of this game, in the span of like 10 or 15 minutes, like we had thought, like you sent me an encouraging email, a text about, saying, you understand, but like we're all in the same boat. And I was like, yeah, we are kind of all in the same boat. And Uri sent me a text, and I was like, kind of like, and then we were like, wait a second, why don't we talk about this on the podcast? And all of a sudden, I'm like back in it,
Yeah.
And
well, you don't have
ahead.
to be back in. I want to make that
No.
clear.
I'm in it. I'm in it because now I'm taking a different approach.
Yeah.
We got to talk about, so in our conversation today, we have to talk about the syndrome, which I just laid out. We can talk more about it because I know you know about that. You've talked to a lot of people that, it's not unfamiliar territory.
So does the syndrome have a name?
No, I don't, I don't know. It's bad chess training.
Chess player?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. Maybe just chess player.
Right.
Bad chess training syndrome or something. No, I don't have a name for it, but it's a real thing. And maybe, I know that I've read tons of helpful posts and blogs and all this kind of stuff describing this very thing. So it's not unique to me. I think it's may be more or less severe depending on the intensity with which you adhere to your goals. And I tend to be very goal-directed and very intense about achieving my goals. And so, that enables me to do stuff like, get a PhD, for example, and that kind of stuff. Like I'm very determined, and my goal to be good at chess was, that was fine, and that was allowed me to write books with Boris Gulko and that kind of stuff. But it also has a downside. Right now, that downside is you want to talk about what are the factors that make it harder. So that's the real issue.
Yeah. So you're 53, and the triggering incident, by the way, because this was all really prologue. I mean, it sounds like maybe if it wasn't this, it would have been something else. But basically, you told me the day that you texted me last week that you spent a lot of time on a given day studying a particular line in the French.
Yeah.
And then you faced it the very next day.
Yeah.
And you couldn't remember.
Not even, but it was like, dude, I mean, it was like study. This is exactly what I was telling you. And then the very next day I got the line in it, and we're not talking about 12 moves deep. We're talking about E4, E6, B3. And I was like, okay, well, I know I played D5, and then he played Bishop B2, and I was like, what was the whole thing that I studied?
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about 2 moves. And I was completely blank. Like, there was nothing. Of course, it's a blitz game, right? So I don't have time to think at all. But I was like, as if I never looked at it before in my life. And I was like, I mean, I know the logical moves you would play in that position. That's not what I play. I prepared a special line for this B3 thing. And I was like, if I can't remember what I'm even the move on move 3, what I just studied, then what am I doing? Like what's really happening?
Yeah. Well, shout out to Dr. Christopher Chabris. We had a Patreon Zoom hangout after I announced this interview, and we were talking about that. He said, by the way, that you really enjoyed your first interview, but he also, and Christopher, for those who don't know, USCF master and very accomplished cognitive scientist, but he said that you were attributing a problem to chess that really belongs to aging, in this case. Like it has, everyone goes through that, I certainly do. And I'll turn 48 soon. So I'm a little bit younger than you, but more and more, the working memory, you walk in a room and you don't remember why you walked in, like that, the frequency of that. And I think that there's a sort of corollary with stuff that's not necessarily, you haven't drilled into your head yet in chess. And I think a lot of chess players, no matter their age, have had that experience, but certainly the frequency goes up as you get older.
Yeah, and it makes you think about like what you should be, what you should be doing. You have to do some management of that. He's right about the aging part for sure, because it's harder to make new long-term memories, and it's harder to make them stick when you're older. So that's, for middle-aged people listening to this podcast, that's already information that you can use for your preparation, for your, for your chess training, right? Play what you know,
Yeah.
because learning new stuff is hard to remember. The new
Yeah.
stuff, you want to play what you've played all along. The thing
Yeah.
you play, go back 20 years. You want to talk about like stuff that I played 20 years ago. I bet you I know it better than that French stuff that I prepared the other day. Like, it's just gone.
Yeah.
And so that's, useful to know, right? Maybe it's time to go back to the stuff and double down on it and work on the hard parts of chess, right? Tactics and
Yeah,
so
and
on
I
and so
think
forth.
there's value in being more plan based as well. Like the older players I've interviewed who've had some success. Like I always think of Terry Chapman, who I interviewed and who's profiled in Chess for Life, really focuses a lot on plans. And the guy I recently interviewed, Matt Gross, who made National Master, also really decided like I'm not gonna win my games and he's about my age based on tactical acuity. I have to revamp my game and base it based on model games, based on the openings that I play. So I think you can learn. It's just if you're trying to learn very specific move orders, very nuanced, when you're younger, that might have been effortless. And now it's like you can put in all this time and still be worse at it.
That's an excellent point. And that's exactly what I did in my latest attempt to get back into it. I was like, you know what? Like I need to take a model game approach.
Yeah.
Play normal positions. It doesn't matter, like, whether you're whether you know the theory or not. You're playing a normal position, and your opponent is unlikely to know the deep nuances either. So you're both playing normal positions, and a plan-based idea, and you're trying to avoid 2-3 move tactical blunders and stuff like that. And that's if you understand where your pieces go and all that kind of stuff and your plan, that's a big deal. And I think that's definitely where where you would want to kind of go, yeah, like someone much stronger, IM or something like that, is going to know, like in some very normal position, maybe some move order stuff.
Yeah.
But below that, probably not so much. You're just going to be like, okay, I understand this position and you understand it, and we're both going to play chess. Some tactical blunder will show up at some point, and somebody will win.
Yeah.
That's like how it works, right?
And the one that loses will think about quitting chess.
Right. So yeah, I think, but I wanted to talk, because we talked about, I don't know what you have on your schedule, but outline, but I wanted to talk about what are the conditions that make this so difficult and so painful right now, because we talked about bearing my soul, so I'm happy to do that, because I've done a lot of thinking about this issue and why it's so difficult right now. And your friend Christopher Chabris,
yeah.
So it is about aging, and I've done it, but it's not just cognitive aging, right? And that's what's really very important to know, that depending where you are in the life cycle, there are different things going on in your life that impact how you experience what it is you're doing, right? So for me, as you said, I'm 53, but I have 2 teenage kids, right? And, retirement's not that far away. 65 is 12 years away. That's like a blip, blip of the eye, and I know I can feel my brain changing. Like it's just not as sharp as, like, I can't get words out as well as I used to. I clearly can't play as well as I used to play. you're facing a very real issue, right, in terms of cognition that has to do with plasticity in the brain, right? We know from research very clearly that over time, right, the plasticity in the brain decreases, that long-term memories and that kind of stuff stay kind of stable, like verbal information and all that kind of stuff, but fluid intelligence, problem solving, right, all the stuff that we need for chess goes down.
Yeah.
And it starts going down at 35, 40 years old, right? So that's why you see that peak in chess players, and they always decline after age 40, except for Vichy.
And Korchnoi, yeah.
And that's probably from hard work, right?
Yeah.
Like you can fight against it, but it Father Time will have his say on that, on your brain. But the life cycle also impacts the psychology of how you experience time.
Yeah.
And this is what I have been kind of fighting with, because the cycle that I've described, where you go in this kind of cycle, this sort of like, I'm going to create a repertoire, then I'm going to go online, play the repertoire to get some games in, then I play terribly, then I go on tilt, and then I quit, and then I do the whole thing over again, right? That is fueled by a pressure that I feel to get it done now. There's no time expansion for me to be like, hey, you know what? I'd love to just study the Catalan.
Right.
Like, that would be beautiful, right? But that idea in my mind, which is what I would really, that's being honest, I'd love to study the Catalan and play the Catalan because I think it's a perfect opening for me. But I don't have the time expansion, the view of time as being unlimited, where I can just explore the Catalan indefinitely without needing to be able to play it in February, because time is limited in my mind, right? And that's an experience that I don't think people kind of appreciate when they're thinking about chess improvement.
Especially if you're like in your 20s and 30s, because I'm certainly starting to feel it as I see how quickly my kids are growing up.
Right.
And I mean, as you alluded to, as you think about where 10 years went, so I certainly get the opportunity cost of, like, you have this goal, you want to make USCF master, and so when you put time in and then you get some feedback that suggests that the time is not paying off, it's noisy feedback, and it seems like you're grading based on the wrong criteria. Like, I mean, if your goal is to become a USCF master, which, by the way, I mean, I think you're close enough where you can do it, but I'm not saying that should be your goal based on the amount of time and effort and angst it might still cause. But if that's your goal, the tournament chess is the grade. Everything else is just practice, Right. So you're holding everything too dearly.
Right.
And as I said immediately when you texted me last week, you're just putting too much pressure on yourself. It removes all the fun.
Right. Lose all the fun.
Yeah.
That's definitely what I do. But that's the pressure that I put on myself. But I think that appreciating the life cycle part of that is really important, because that's the part that's the pressure that makes exploration kind of fueled with anxiety and dread. So we know from research, right? There's a theory called socio-emotional selectivity theory, and it argues that when we experience time as unlimited, we're more likely to explore.
Right.
We're more likely to do stuff and learn new things and go new places and all that kind of stuff. But when we experience time as limited, right, we tend to maximize the things that make us feel better, right? And so when we have a situation with, like, learning in chess, you don't have that same unlimited experience of time that you had when you were younger, where you could be like, sure, you know what, I'm going to study the Catalan and play it for 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever. Like, it has to happen now. And that's if your judgment is about, like, results, it doesn't work, right? It doesn't. That's not going to pan out in the end. So it requires for people, for middle-aged people, by middle age I'm talking about 40 and 50, for people like us, requires understanding So chess improvement, right, I think requires understanding both the brain, as you were talking about. There's some very real things that you can do in terms of chess improvement, right? Like, okay, well, I'm not going to focus on move order specific types of stuff. I want to play plans and ideas. So what are the things that support that way of thinking versus move by move chess, where you're going to forget stuff pretty quickly. And also to factor in these psychological pressures, that is kind of critical to know, like for me, what I have to do in order to think clearly and not get bent out of shape.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the big piece that I prepared for today, is to talk about like values and goals, right? Because I don't think actually, like as you said, yes, I think I could become a USCF master. I do, but at what cost?
Exactly. It might be too much.
You know, I think I could do it, but I have kids, I have wife, I have career, I have so on and so forth. And yes, I could, but at what cost? Do my kids hate me because I spend every single minute of the day, you know, trying to train and study? They probably already do for the amount that I do, and I don't do it enough, right?
Right.
So, you know, it can be done. It's just a question of, does it fit with your values? And so I did some thinking about this, and there's a therapy, different modes of therapy. I teach different types of therapies, and I do different types of therapies. And one of those therapies is called acceptance commitment therapy. And they're big on values and goals as a starting off therapy, trying to figure out what your values and goals are, so that you can make sure that what you're doing in your life is consistent with your values and goals, right? So I kind of doubled down on values and goals for the last week, trying to figure out, like, what do I want to do, you know, and is there a way for me to think differently about chess so that I can enjoy it? Because one of the things that I was thinking about, I was talking to Grandmaster Davor Rogic, who's a Croatian Grandmaster, and he was talking about that I have a real love for the game, and that he would hate to see me not play, not enjoy it, because I really enjoy it, right? It's hard. He thinks it's gonna be hard for me to give up, which is clearly true. And I was thinking about what I really, really enjoy about chess, right? And one of the things that I really enjoy is playing like a slow over the board tournament game. Like I really, like, to me, it's like going to a temple or something, you know, like to have that moment where the clocks start and it's just all of a sudden there are like 50 people in a room and it's quiet.
Yeah.
And we're all playing chess. And it's like, it's such an incredible experience to be able to do that. It's a privilege for me to like quiet the mind and to think about a position. And even if you're thinking about it in not the greatest way, you're still thinking about it, and putting in all that cognitive effort is so enjoyable. And I really, really, really enjoy that a lot. And I enjoy the truth and the philosophical nature of chess, right? Like Smyslov in his book talks about the truth in the chessboard, you know, the truth of the position. Like it's a philosophical thing that if we're looking at a chess position, that there's a truth in it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that that's like philosophically quite beautiful as a metaphor for, you know, the world and everything, but also just the idea that I could be thinking about that. And so that's like when I was starting to really think about like what's important to me, like that's really, you know, that's certainly what I enjoy. And that took me down kind of a rabbit hole. So like in acceptance commitment therapy, we talk about how do you know what your values are? Like how do you go about that? And there are tools online now that do like a values card sorting task. So what they do is they ask, you have like 200 cards and you sort them. There are cards like adventure, education, friendship, relationships, health and integrity and religion and spirituality, all these, that's literally all it says is that. Maybe it has a little explanation underneath it. And then you sort the cards and you keep sorting them and you keep sorting them, right? And you end up with like core values, right? That are really important to you. And when I did that, right, I had education, right, which is obvious probably. Achievement, I'm very determined. Like it's important for me to determine to go have goals and to go after those goals, to have direction, right? That's really important to me. Family is very important to me, right? My kids, my wife, my dog. Those things are really important to me. Health, physical, psychological, emotional health, very important to me. And integrity, like being in a person that has integrity, that's honest, that's someone that you can rely on and talk to, and who's not going to double stab you in the back and cheat, and try to
No anal
win.
plugs.
Huh?
No anal plugs.
Right. No anal plugs, and just like being a person of integrity, not trying to cheat the system or anything like that, just being, like a good, honest person. That's important to me. So those were like the 5 core values that I had. So dropping everything, right, to do what I need to do, to put in the effort and the time to raise my rating up to US Master is inconsistent with a whole bunch of my core values. It's consistent with one of them,
right,
but inconsistent
yeah.
with the others.
Yeah.
So that means, and I would encourage people to do that, because if you're, and I know from, I don't treat chess players necessarily, but in my practice, very often I'll have a patient who's anxious and depressed. They're working in finance and their values are completely different
Right.
from those types of values. Like they're not materialistic. They're not interested in money, and they're not interested in getting ahead and doing all, that kind of stuff. They're interested in family and health and religion, or whatever it is, and spirituality. And so it's like it's completely different from what they're doing. And it's like, well, no wonder you're depressed. You spend your weekends working, and you're missing out on your family, and that's one of your core values. So you need to line up what you're doing with what's important to you. And so in ACT, we have a whole sort of way of going about doing that. So I went back and did that for myself. And so that's, I think, important. I'd invite like everyone listening to think about what are their core values, and you can go online and do a card sorting task to get a sense of that.
That's great advice. Are you familiar, Joel, with this book, 4,000 Weeks, Oliver
No.
Burkeman? Okay, you should read it. It's about time management, but it's really about aging. I mean, basically, it's just, it's kind of written for high achievers. I enjoyed the book, but because in hearing you discuss core values, I don't think I'm as achievement oriented as someone like you, which shows by the fact that I only have an undergrad degree and that I'm a chess podcaster. But it's a very helpful book. He's also done like the podcast circuits. You can find interviews around the book. He has a new book out that looks good that I haven't read, but you can find interviews around when the book came out. But basically, the core message of the book is, if you're someone who's accomplished a lot in life, you want to do everything, and you're not going to do everything. Acceptance. The same thing they tell addicts in other, domains. The first step is acceptance. And in hearing you talk, the overriding message to me is you should play chess, but you have to let go of the goal of being a USCF master. Your primary goal has to be enjoyment, or else it's just a path to misery, in my opinion.
Right, exactly. Well, and
it's not that you can't do it, but it can't animate you. But anyway, go ahead.
Right. So that takes us to what do we do, right?
Yeah.
And what I have been focusing on this whole week has been, well, what does that mean for our goals? Yesterday, I had a meeting with Ann Holding, who is a psychologist at NYU, to talk about goal pursuit, because I was coming on here and I wanted to talk to her about her research. And she talks about goal pursuit and action crises, which is what we're talking about today, right? Where you're in this conflict, this struggle between, do I double down or do I disengage from my goal? right? And I talked to her about, I was talked to her about my crisis and how my understanding of it was, and we talked about different types of research and goal disengagement and all this kind of stuff. And she was asking questions like, focusing on the goal, like what is your motivation, and what is and just starting to think about like to get away. I mean, what we typically have talked about, right, is in my chapter, right, I talk about outcome goals versus process goals, right? And so that's a start in the right direction, so that like instead of having some outcome goal of like 2,200, right, that's kind of out of my hands. Right? Like I may sit down and I may end up playing Magnus Carlsen, and I'm not going to probably win that game 999 times out of 1,000. Maybe all 1,000 games, right? I'm not going to win that game. And so that winning that game and increasing my rating is out of my control. But what is in my control is doing the good work that needs to be done in order to be a better player, like studying your tactics and working on your end games, getting good sleep, having a good psychology, a good psychological mindset when you approach the game, focusing on, the process of playing and putting in good effort and all of that kind of stuff. That's all in my control, right? So that's what in the chapter, what I talk about between like process versus outcome oriented goals. And so making that shift is important, but what she was talking about was kind of, even more than that. Like, what's important to you? What do you like about it? Like why is it important to get better in the first place? Why isn't it okay just to be the level that you are? Why do you
Right.
why is that implicit in our conversation, right? Or in my thinking is that I must get better. I have to improve. Like, you have an entire podcast dedicated to that, right? And why is that important? Like, we need to understand that in order to be able to get ourselves in the right mindset. So if it's important to you, then that's really important. But if it's making you miserable, then we need to work on it, right? So that so that's kind of what I've been doing this whole week, has been trying to figure out how can I rethink my goals so that I can enjoy playing and do the thing that I really actually like the most, which is just going and playing. Like that's the most enjoyable. How do I get there? How do I get that? That's my new goal. Like going to Parsippany is my new goal.
Yeah.
Like I don't care what happens. If I play, that's a victory.
Yeah.
And so now there's a whole literature in the lifespan development aging world that talks about goal pursuit and how you deal with that, right? Judah Heckhausen and Brennstatter and Roche, all these people, I'm just naming psychologists for you, who are in this sort of area of like, well, what do you do? Because this is not uncommon in all, you can imagine all kinds of goals, right? Like you might have a goal to get married and have kids. Well, if you're a 35-year-old woman, all of a sudden there's a great deal of pressure on you. The same kind of pressure that I might be putting on myself to learn and improve at chess at 53.
Right.
Like I don't feel like I have an expanded time zone there. And she's not going to feel like she's got an extended time zone there. She's not going to be, hey, I don't actually have I have 5 years maybe. Right. So you start to feel a tremendous amount of pressure on what you're doing. And so that's where we have to, if your focus is on chess improvement, why is that important? And then also, how can we formulate goals that are consistent and allows for the like experience to be rich and meaningful versus a burden.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I have this argument with my wife all the time. I always say, I have to get home and do my puzzles. She's like, you don't have to get home and do your puzzles. You want to get home. And I'm like, no, I need to get home. I have to get home to do my puzzles. Otherwise, I won't be able to improve.
Right.
So you see, we're getting into this cycle. Well, why is that important? Well, because it's important. Do you know what I'm saying? So understanding that and then thinking about your language, like that's important. So when I talk about I ought, should, and have to versus want to, that changes how I'm feeling, right? Because when I have to do something, I feel pressure. I'm intense about it. I get that pressure, and then there's all this negative feeling associated with it, rather than I want to go study a 5-move checkmate like puzzle or something like that, and explore like the beauty of how these pieces move together that would create a mating net. And then, like if you think about that, that's a rich and meaningful experience. That's what I love about chess. That's beautiful. And that makes me feel good. So changing our goals to be consistent with our values can help us change how we experience the process of chess. Now, chess development, chess improvement. So I think that's the message that I want to try to convey to people, and as a patient, not as a therapist right now. Like
that's what you would tell yourself.
This is what I am telling myself, and what I need to be able to do to be able to play, because otherwise I'm not going to play. It's not enjoyable anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So I've got to do this, or else I'm not going to play. Right. So that's what we have to be able to do. Remember the commercial? You're from here, right? East Coast.
Yeah.
Remember, I don't know if this is a local commercial, but in the old days, back in the 80s, there was the hair club for men.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember the guy with the, I'm not only the president, but I'm also a client.
Yeah.
That's me. No one ever gets that joke because they're not old enough and they're not local enough. But I use that metaphor all the time. I'm like, the only difference, I tell patients this in my practice all the time, the only difference between me and you is that I've done it before.
Yeah.
I've done treatment. I've studied this stuff. I've studied myself. I've processed stuff myself. And so I've done it before. I'm a little bit ahead of you. That's all. And so right now I'm the patient trying to help myself. How can I change my mindset so that I can play? And I think that there are probably other people in my shoes for sure. I've heard about it. I've read about it. And so I think that the thing that people don't talk about is this issue of like, what are your values and how can you think about your goals so they're consistent with your values so that you can do the thing that you like.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of other people, let's talk about Levy Rozman as we discussed.
Yeah, Levy. I hope he calls me.
Okay. So I'm going to set the stage.
Shout out to Levy.
Yeah.
I open invitation. I want to talk to him.
So for most people listening probably, are following his road to GM, but just to briefly set the stage, obviously I've interviewed him about this in the past, as well as his immensely more popular YouTube series covering it. But he just played a tournament in New York where he had a really bad result, at least based on wins and losses.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And he's got Hikaru analyzing every game that he plays, which is terrifying in its own right. He's got Hans Niemann offering to collab with him and give him free coaching. And we should say, by the way, that we're recording this on Wednesday, January 22nd, and this will be out in 6 days. So if there's developments on that front, I apologize. But Levy, he just had such a rough tournament. Hans Niemann said in one of his videos, he compared the tournament that Levy chose to play in to the Hunger Games, because he says U.S. players are underrated, New York players are particularly underrated, and then when you play in a round robin invitational of people trying to get norms, it's like the triple whammy basically of not selecting your opponents well. But first of all, I really admire that Levy is putting himself out there in the way that he is. It's not easy, and you could see in some of his videos that he's troubled by being criticized despite all the success that he's had. But I definitely saw a lot of parallels. Have you watched these most recent videos, Joel? I know you're following the journey, like big picture.
Yeah, I haven't watched a lot of it. I noticed, I guess on like some kind of YouTube thing where I sort of followed that he was going to go for GM, and then he went on this sort of thing, and then he quit, and then he started again, and then he was, back on, I think there, and I sort of got the history of it through like kind of clicking backwards. And then I saw that I guess he had a coach, Arturs
Nieksans, yeah, who I also interviewed.
Nieksans,
Yeah.
and he was broadcasting during the thing, and so I watched some of those games, and I watched his match with Pierre Kremling, so that's where I'm at with it, and I just felt the same pain and suffering that I experienced, but a different different level and much more public, which is laudable, but maybe more painful. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's got one up on me. He's playing, and that's a big deal because I can't even get myself to play.
Yeah, well, I hope he can keep it up. I don't, I worry
Yeah.
every time he has a bad tournament, and this one was particularly bad.
Yeah, he wants to quit.
But
Yeah,
I definitely see some parallels, like in the achievement orientation, because the guy works so much harder than he has to, given the level of success that he has, like, with his Chesley project and all of his interviews and stuff.
Yeah, the
like,
Chesley thing is actually pretty cool.
I haven't checked it out.
Yeah. It is very cool, and he's hardworking, and
but he doesn't seem to work as hard on his chess, So it's a similar thing,
I don't know. We have to talk to him. Maybe he'll call me, but I think it's what I think I would talk to him about would be exactly the kind of stuff I was talking about today, about values, about goals, and how you can rethink your goals so that you can ultimately achieve your goals, but you're okay if you don't. And that's, I think, in the end, right? Erikson, 8 Stages of Life, wrote a great book back in 1950 called The Childhood in Society, and in it there's a chapter on the 8 ages of man. And at the end, he labels that stage ego integrity versus despair. Right. And if you want to look back, and what he talks about is ego integrity, and we talked about integrity earlier. If you want to look back over we would like to be able to look back over our life at the later stages of our life and be like, what, I basically wouldn't have done it differently, and that's a goal. That's an awesome goal. Like if you can, because you don't want to get to your end of your life and be like, I fucked that up. You know what I mean? Because then you're miserable, you're upset, you're whatever, you're drinking too much and everything. So you want to be able to look back and be like, yeah, I kind of, sort of this and that, but I basically would have done it the same way. And that's kind of a goal of mine. I think about that a lot, that kind of question as, and what would I do differently right now? Like, I think that helps shift things a little bit, like put things in perspective and shift things a little bit in terms of how I spend my time. So I think mainly for people as intensely driven as he is and as smart as he is and gifted to be as good as he is, I think that finding a way to take the pressure off while simultaneously putting in the effort will be the difference for him. And it's going to be the difference for me, right? As I said, he's got one up on me. For me to be able to show up and play and enjoy myself is kind of my new goal, and around that would be, trying to rethink my goals so that I can enjoy myself and that I can still do the hard work because that's the stuff I enjoy, but not have it be connected to like life and death.
Yeah.
Like it Boris, in all his wisdom, right? He said to me one day, I'm sure I was already talking about this stuff about ratings and people are obsessed with them online. You can just talk rating about getting from 1600 to 1800, 1400 to 1600. And Boris, I forget what, but essentially he was like, what are you going to do with those rating points? Are you going to like cash them in and get some prize or money or like let's be real, like they're at up until a certain point, those rating points mean almost nothing. Like, you know what I mean? Like at some point, maybe it's a difference between getting invited to a round robin or not. But for the first 2,400 of those points,
Right.
they're worthless. They're like, they don't mean anything other than you, in your mind, tell yourself that you're a little bit closer to that person across from you, so you might be able to win. Like, that's the only thing that they actually kind of tell you.
Yeah.
But in reality, they're not worth anything. And so he was just like, what are they going to do for you? What are those points going to do for you? That's not why you play chess.
I love it.
I asked him that in the first book, why do you play chess? You know, and I remember his answer, and I actually don't remember exactly. It could have been second, third book. I don't remember.
So the Lessons with the Grandmaster series.
I think Lessons with the Grandmaster, their first book, is actually like, it's a really, I mean, they're really, all three of those books are really good, especially if you're in my rating range, like 1,800 to 2,200 maybe, where you can see me struggling to solve problems and having him kind of walk me through that process. I think it's really fantastic for anyone trying to get better to go through all of those books.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only reason I made 500 rating point gain. Right. Is that I was literally talking to him, and I would say, he would, you know, what would you play? And I would say, you know, well, I'm thinking this and thinking that, and I would do that. And he was like, I would never have thought of that move. I wouldn't have even considered that move.
Right.
I remember that very clearly. I was like, you wouldn't have considered that move? He's like, no, I wouldn't have, because I know that I'm winning.
Right.
Like, that move is irrelevant. Like, if he takes that piece, I'm winning. I'm going to mate him. That's not what you calculate. You calculate this, that, the other. That's what you calculate, because those might prevent you from winning. So it was very interesting. I remember that very clearly, that moment. But I asked him, and he said, I play chess for the adventure.
Wow. And this is
like,
an absolute legend, by the way. You know,
yeah, total
top,
legend.
Top 10 in the world. Yeah.
Total legend. And his personal story is amazing, too.
Yeah.
Being a refusenik and a hunger strike and trying to get out of Russia.
And 7 years he couldn't play, right?
Couldn't play for 7 years.
Yeah.
So personal story. Like, I mean, here's someone, there is someone that could very seriously had made a challenge for the world championship crown had they not taken 7 years of his prime away.
Yeah.
Right. Like, he was not allowed to play.
Yeah, so he was trying to get out of the, so just to be perfectly clear for listeners, he was trying to get out of the Soviet Union, and people who were known to be trying to emigrate, the Soviet Union wouldn't allow them to play.
Right.
So
and he had to end up going on hunger strike, and he finally got out. He finally got out, I guess 87 or something like that. But he lost, you know, I mean, he lost 7 prime years.
Yeah.
Like, he starts playing again in 87. You can look at his record. He played almost no games between 80 and 87 or 81, and like a few games, but still not many. He was not allowed to play.
Yeah.
So, and he, you know, here's someone that could have been. I mean, he has a plus score against Kasparov.
Right.
Like, he could have been a contender in the World Championships. He was 94. He was in the candidates, right, and lost to Short, who went on to play Kasparov, right? Like,
already in his 40s then. Yeah.
And he was already in his 40s.
Yeah.
Right? He'd already taken. They already took the prime of his career, and you're asking him, like, why do you play chess? It wasn't rating points or to win my next game. It was about adventure.
Yeah.
Like, that's someone who's got the game is connected with the goals of the game, and his approach to the game was consistent with his values. And so he was able to, at least, I guess, not have the eat away at him, because you can, if anyone had a reason for it to eat away at him, it would have been him.
Yeah.
Right. And that was not what he said when I asked him that question. So why is it eating away at me? Why is it eating away at Levy Rozman?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, Levy.
So that's where I would focus.
Yeah. I don't know. My diagnosis, and you never have all the information, but, you know, I'm a big fan of Levy's, as I've told him when I've interviewed him, big fan of this pursuit in particular. I love the story. It would be great for chess, etc. And I'm just, as is evident by the number of people I interview about these topics, I love the quests, even if I don't personally have the ambition to take on something like that. But I do have the sense, just from the outside looking in, like his Patreon project, where he was, you know, you subscribed and then you had access to his lessons with Nieksans, which were amazing for someone around my level. I mean, it's basically like getting lessons, and you're paying $10 a month. But he ended up like refunding subs because he wasn't getting enough lessons to be able to present the content and make it feel like he's giving people value for what they pay for. So because he's working so hard on all of his other projects, he mentioned in one of his videos his second book is on the way. Like he doesn't have to do the second book, So anyway, so my diagnosis is and also I think what he's trying to do, even though he's not that far from Grandmaster strength, the amount of rating points he has to gain, it's harder than what you're trying to do. Even though he's 20 years younger, but he really would have to spend 4 hours a day. I don't think there's a way around it for him. Whereas for you, I think, if you could spend, I'm not saying you should, but if you did spend 90 minutes a day and played 50 rated games a year, I think you'd have a decent chance.
Right.
Whereas with him, because he's trying to make Grandmaster, it's way harder.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it's going to go.
It becomes harder. The better you get, the harder it is.
Yeah, even though he's younger, and super talented,
But also he's feeling, again, back to the life cycle stuff that I was talking about, he's also feeling time-limited pressure. Right? This is not someone that's saying to himself, I'll do it when I'm 40.
Yeah.
Because you don't do it when you're 40. And so when you feel like, I got to do it now, right, now you've added a whole bunch of pressure, right, to the process. And when you've got that outcome goal of like GM, so there's a whole, if I get ever a chance to sit down with him, that's what I would focus on. Goals, values, lining those things up so that, we can get rid of the pressure, the negative affect, the bad feeling, the depression, the anxiety.
Yeah. But in looking at his games, there is, and this is something Hans said in his little video that he made that I'll link to, there is something very psychological, and it happens for all of us, but he's not playing to his chess strength. As it is, like he's playing below his strength,
but it's not because of chess,
right? Exactly.
That's what if my fantasy conversation with him.
Yeah. But it's interesting to track, but mainly want you guys to be happy. It's not worth suffering.
Right. Like, because then what do you do with that, right?
Yeah.
It's, goal disengagement, right? You have to be like, okay, I have to give up that goal.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, Joel, so as we wrap up, we're playing the tournament, right? We're going to do it.
We're playing it.
Because as I told you, I'm going to interview Donnie Ariel soon. He's got a Road to the GM series, which, I got to trash talk Donnie every time. It's preposterous for him to say he's going to make GM. But me and Jan Gustafsson and Donnie are going to discuss how absurd it is. But Donnie's a very strong player and in the same boat, could quit any day now or could like double down,
Right. Right.
So it should be fun, and if anyone listening is there, please say hi. I'm looking forward to that, but mainly, like I said, just want everyone listening and ourselves to find the right role for chess in our lives. The eternal. People think the quest is to get the rating, but it's really to find the right, to find the right way to enjoy the game with the proper amount of time while still, putting higher priority on the more important things.
Right. Yeah, and I think that if you do that, you can change the way you're thinking about it. Then you can actually focus on the things that are important, because we know that it's not time; it's about the quality of the time.
Yeah.
Right. So if you put the right amount of time into the right things, that's going to actually help. Like I don't. As I've been told before, my openings are probably master strength already, right? It's I've created so many repertoires for myself. That's irrelevant, right? What I need to do is focus on the actual playing. Like all I probably have to do is play.
Yeah.
Just literally every game a week, one game a week. That's all I need to do.
That is definitely the most important thing. Yeah.
Right. I've never done it.
Yeah.
My whole career, if you look at my chess career, maximum 20 games in a year, 25 maybe.
Yeah.
And that's because I played some Parsippany, which gives you like 6 games.
Right.
Right. So other than that, like maybe 18, 20 games or something. I don't know. If I pull it up, you can see. And I've never played ever. Like if you look at the recommendations from the Chess Dojo, for example, or even in your, by the way, fantastic book, it talks about the importance of playing like every game. Like that's if anyone's like the bare minimum is to play one slow game a week.
Yeah.
And I've never done that ever.
Oh,
so
Yeah.
imagine if I did that.
Yeah, no, that would
Just
be
that
meant
one thing.
if you were to
Yeah.
double,
Yeah.
recommit to the goal. But as I say in the book, I don't, I'm not going to pretend that's easy. That it's not like that's a small commitment. It's a massive commitment. So it's not to
Right.
be,
Even to play one game a week.
yeah, it's not to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
But it is the number one thing that one should do. But I actually forgot that we have a Patreon sub question. So this is from Jason Sands. Jason, we touched on this in my prior interview with Joel. So definitely, and anyone still listening, I recommend you check it out if you haven't already. That's episode 309. Maybe we could briefly summarize because you talked about having this exact issue in that interview. But Jason asks, he says, I've always suffered from pre-competition anxiety. Usually it disappears as soon as the competition begins, but often lately it's preventing me from even participating in normal everyday chess matches online. Do you have any advice or exercises to help with competition anxiety? This is like right in
I'm
his
not
wheelhouse.
only the client, I'm the hair club president,
Right.
right? I mean, I have the same problem. That's why I don't go. And so the cycle, that's part of the cycle, right? You feel, I mean, in general, anxiety creates what people do with anxiety is they avoid.
Right.
Right? And so your number one rule, right, in trying to build self-esteem and self-confidence is to do the thing that you're avoiding,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Approach, don't avoid, you said.
Approach, don't avoid. It's like the number one rule. It's the rule for anxiety. All treatments are based essentially on approaching and not avoiding, right? Because when you avoid, you give power to the thing that you're afraid of, right? So whatever this anxiety is about, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger by not playing, right? So we have to ultimately just approach, don't avoid. Now, there's all kinds of things that you can do to try to reduce the anxiety, right? Behavioral stuff you can do, for example, deep breathing exercises, mindfulness exercises. They're, trying to understand it for what it is, right? Like it's your brain telling you that you're going into a dangerous situation and you're going to die, and therefore you need to be concerned, right? That's literally what's happening, right? Because anxiety is a fear response. Fear is, some threat that you're experiencing, and you are in a flight or fight response physiologically, and that's what anxiety is. You're getting this rapid kind of increase in all these symptoms that are associated with defending yourself from a bear or running away as fast as you can. And so why are you having that kind of response to playing a game, right? So now we're back to, well, what are we thinking about? What are the values and what are the goals? And why are we experiencing the chess game as a life and death situation, right? So there are things you can do in terms of just managing the anxiety before the game, right? Like we're talking about like over the board stuff. So like for me, right, I do the same thing. I have the same routine. I do some deep breathing. I warm up. I'm comforted by the routine that I create for myself, right? There's that kind of stuff. You can do some deep breathing, some mindful exercises. There's understanding what's happening, right, in terms of the mind creating a dangerous situation, right? And you can do some mindfulness exercises around that. For example, you could say, okay, well, thank you, brain, or thank you, mind, or thank you, brain. I use brain myself, but thank you, brain, for protecting me in this situation and trying to make sure that I'm safe and that I'm not going to be killed by this experience that I'm just about to go through. Thank you. I appreciate that. But that thought right now, not so helpful to me because I'm just playing a game of chess,
Right.
right? I'm not going to face a 12-foot grizzly bear. So thank you, but I'm going to let that thought go down, put that thought on a leaf and let it float down the river, right? And watch that thought go. And as that thought goes, you can wave goodbye to that thought and come back to your focus of breathing and preparing yourself. And as other anxiety thoughts come up, you can acknowledge those thoughts, thank your brain for trying to save you in this very dangerous situation. Acknowledge it. Don't fight against that. Acknowledge your brain is doing what it's supposed to do. That's what it does. It's protecting you. Good brain. Thank you. But not helpful right now because I'm not fighting a bear, actually. I'm just playing a game. Let that thought go. Down the stream it goes. Come back to our breathing, right? So that's like a kind of just a mindful exercise that you can do with those types of thoughts. We understand where the thoughts are coming from. And then also, again, I suspect that Jason is putting a lot of pressure on himself, the kind of pressure that has to do with goals, right, that are kind of outcome oriented as opposed to process oriented. Yeah. So, and we're back to what we were kind of talking about earlier today.
Yeah, my favorite Eckhart Tolle quote is "Nothing real is threatened." That's what I remind myself in those situations.
That is true.
Just a game, but easier said than done, of course.
Yeah, right. Because it's life and death in our minds.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Joel, great to chat. And the tournament for those interested takes place in about a month. No, February 14th, I think. So not that long.
Is it? Yeah, that's right. 15, 16, 17, right?
Yeah.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Saturday, something like that.
Yeah. So hopefully we make it to the tournament. It's the number one goal.
It's the week. Yeah. If we get there, and if all of us are there, we get a prize. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the we got new goals, man.
Exactly. All right. Thanks again, Joel. Really appreciate it. As always, and again, his books are great. Lessons with the Grandmaster series and Analyzing the Chess Mind has a lot of good advice for himself in it. Take care, Joel.
Take care, bye.
Okay.